Well, hi, this is Fake Zappa again with another reading from the deplorable book called The Real Frank Zappa Book. I just published a story called The Real Fake Zappa Story and the Fake Zappa Story that you could see on fakezappa.com. And if you click to go to the next about page or whatever and you want to see the true story or the fake story. And there are a lot of books written about Frank Zappa, and people recommend that I read them, and I don't want to. And I decided that since I became a religious person in the last 7.5 years almost, I decided recently that what if I take faith principles and similar principles that I had when I used to read the Bible for almost 20 years of my adult life, and it had an empowering experience for me. And I think if I am able to kind of get the, for lack of a better term, the spirit behind the book, that it helps me to believe in myself and what I'm doing a little better. So a couple of things I did was I'm looking into ordering, because here's the funny thing. I thought, okay, if this is my Bible, then maybe I'll give some away, but they're expensive. The cheapest I found was $13 a copy if I buy like $300 something worth or something like that. But, you know, I just might do that. I'm staying put maybe for a while. I'm still in the Florida Keys, but I'm not in Key West. And something else I thought about, speaking of, like, when I was a Bible believer and I used to order boxes of Bibles and give them away and shit like that, I was like my own Gideon's International Bible Society, or whatever they are. The dingbats that would put them in hotels and shit like that. It'd be great to have these in a hotel, man. It says here, look at this. This book belongs in every home. I mean, the New York Post said that. And so I'm going to read the second half of chapter 8, which is all about music. And oh my god. So here's what's funny is this goes all the way up to like what, page 199, and I read a review on Scamazon because I was looking at, you know, ordering some of these books, and they're about $17-18. Some of them are as high, like somebody wanted $50 for, I know there were some autographed copies, which I don't give a shit. I mean, look what I do to these books anyways, and it finally dried out. It still took another 2 or 3 or more days after last Tuesday when I did the reading, and it's now another Tuesday. It happens to be 420 day. So I had some more of this stuff, which is the Delta 8, which is kind of intense. Damn, so I'm a little stupid right now. Oh, speaking of that, listen to We're Only In It For The Money today. Again, this is my favorite one of his. And something else, I forgot, just as I turned the camera off last week, I remembered that thing from Petrushka, which was from the Status Back Baby, which is the dum 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 dum. I forgot, because he does little musical quotations from the big three of Stravinsky. And if you've listened to Stravinsky like I did when I was 15, when he was 15, really not even having the connection of whether Zappa was listening to Stravinsky at 15. I was just happened to listen to him. Got Stravinsky at the library, and of course it's Rite of Spring, Firebird, and Petrushka, and they're quite different pieces, but they're all something that everybody who's into Zappa has got to listen to those 3 classical pieces if they're going to listen to any of his classical. That's just my opinion. Because you get an essence of how he thinks musically. This book really gives me an essence of how he thinks politically, and he even mentions stuff about his faith. So anyways, this review that I read in Scamazon said the book goes downhill at page 199, and look, it's like a chapter for my dad. So that guy on Amazon.com that was like talking about that's where he lost interest in the book, and I don't even know if he finished the book at that point. It was just like, oh, he just goes on and on about his political opinions. Like, fuck yeah, this, you will be amazed if you've never read this book, and if this is kind of your audio book source of this thing, because for whatever reason you're not getting a paper copy or an ebook, which is cool because maybe you have cognitive issues or something like that. The rest of this book is so predictive. In fact, I just saw something here recently that was referring to him as he had been some kind of prophet. Well, if you predict something and it happens, there's nothing necessarily really spiritual about that. And I think from a secular perspective, you might get away with calling somebody a prophet if they predict stuff that comes true. And so I would like to do a video where I pretend to channel the Mr. Zappa from the afterlife or something like that, because he would really trip out on 2021. Oh my God. It would be so weird to just try to, and how dare I imagine what he would say. But if I read this book enough, I do a kind of a mind meld with him. And so the other principle, besides it being empowering, besides me wanting to give it away, and it's kind of like you're going to the source of, this is his words, although he would have not spelled microphone M-I-K-E. Everywhere I've seen it, it's M-I-C. So that must have been this Otro Granoso guy. And somebody must have missed that. Either that or maybe he calls it Mike, like the name Michael. But the other principle, and I've been doing this now for a year, is this is the only book I'm reading. And it's really funny because I'm thinking about a guy named Smith Wigglesworth. You've never heard of Smith Wigglesworth. And that's okay. I forgive you. But Smith Wigglesworth was a faith preacher, and the only book, not even newspapers, the only book he read was the Bible. And he had such an unusual life. Or maybe they were legends. But I love how Frank debunks all of his legends, especially at the beginning of the book here. And his experiences with dealing with a fucking orchestra. And I can't stand the composers that I've met who have actually gotten their stuff played by even a small orchestra. You talk about assholes, because somebody who is that privileged, I mean, they have to be super privileged, recognized, connected, and all that. It has very little or nothing to do with whether they're composers or not. And I have yet to meet anybody who I would really consider having a respect for their compositions. And especially when I meet them and they've gotten their stuff played by orchestras. And it's like, fuck you. I mean, look how much this guy suffered. And he was doing this as a 14, 15-year-old. So this here, I'm going to pronounce this very scary. And this is page 168. Science hadn't told us yet why some people find it amusing when they hear an old-time horn go, "Aruga." I'm waiting for the answer because I'm one of those idiots. I like sound effects a lot, percussive and vocal, and use them often in my arrangements. The ending of the 1988 deluxe version of Peaches and Regalia uses them along with multiple superimposed AAIMs. And these are archetypal American icon modules. When the melody comes in after the second intro, we use fake Devo superimposed on the Twilight Zone rhythm section, while the nice little melodies and reharmonized with an ugly chord traveling parallel. Then there's a short break and says woo woo, like the Count Floyd from SCTV. It doesn't mean anything, but to see it Ike Wills pretending to be Count Floyd for one of the two beats in the middle of all was something I found enjoyable. And then, just to make sure that you didn't miss it, when the melody repeats the next time, it stoops just a little bit longer and he says, woo, woo, woo. Of course, it's mega stupid. That's why I like it. I did that wrong, by the way. Not really on purpose. By the time I saw Count Floyd, I almost strangled. I was drinking a cup of coffee, lying in bed, watching television, and it was a complete surprise. Joe Flowery nailed the essence of TV monster movie cheese without even using a real word from English. Big eyebrows, Joe. Real big eyebrows. Road rats. Musicians' priorities change on the road. In rehearsal, they're struggling to get the piece learned. On the road, they're struggling to get a peep at the front row before the lights go down to see whether there's any interesting, quote, vegetation, end quote, out there. Every band does that. I've never been on the road with an orchestra, but I'm sure they have their meisters too. I respect musicians' idiosyncrasies. They add, quote, texture, end quote, to a performance. Musicians tend to generate better texture when they get the blowjob. Yes, I want them to find that elusive cross between a waitress and an industrial vacuum cleaner, like 200 motels, I guess. One of the more boring chores I am required to perform as a band leader is maintaining corporate discipline during the show. While the performance is in progress, I know that the radar is on. Everybody is looking for, you guessed it. That's okay, they should all get the blowjob. But they should get it the honest way. They should earn it by playing the songs right. Sometimes they try to cheat, and, folks, it is not a pretty sight. For instance, there are a lot of reasons why musicians like to play solos on stage. But the usual reason in rock and roll is to get the blowjob. The best way to ensure that you look like the greatest thing going on while you play your big solo is to make sure that you end your solo by going up the scale, then grab that last note and repeat it as fast as you can. And I'm not going to demonstrate that. The statement is the same on the statement is the same on any instrument. Oh, I'm squirting now. Clever subtext to the audience. In the case of violinist Jean-Luc Ponty, who was with the band briefly in the early 70s, no matter what the solo was, after a certain period of time on the road, he always ended it with the same passage. He'd wiggle up to the top of the instrument and scroll it all over the place on that last note, and the crowd went wild. But if you're another guy in the band and you see that happening every night, you go, oh, to a certain extent, Alan Zavad, our 1984 keyboard player, would do the same thing. He would end his solo with this thing that everybody called the volcano. He held the sustain pedal down and churned and smashed away to get the blur going, then topped it off the end with a flourish. It worked every time, but it got to be a band joke. In fact, Alan really is a great pianist and film composer. And just that, maybe because he was working in a rock and roll band, he thought that type of solo was appropriate vehicle to project his aura across advanced continental areas. I find it especially disturbing when the band is walking into a stage and get the equipment ready. A musician cranks off a tiny, unaccompanied soloette in order to draw attention to himself while piddling with his amplifier. In Norway, we had played several times in a place called Drømmehalle, or, as the band referred to it, the Drummond, Holland. The last time we performed there was in the fall of 1984. Some months before that date, Ike used the word spoo, roughly the equivalent of jizz, in a conversation. I don't know where it came from, or if he made it up. In any event, spoo turned out to be the mystery word on stage that night. When we came back to the encore, Ike arrived first and was kneeling down in front of his amplifier doing a kind of low-rent Jimi Hendrix, wee, 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 wee. And I walked out and witnessed this act of near desperation. I said, "Spoo!" to him. He got it right away. Translation: you're jerking off in front of your amplifier, Dr. Willis, and I know it. Does humor belong in music? And there's a pie. I swear that Zappa looks more like me than it does Frank, because of the roundish face, I think. Sponsored by Subway. I forgot to mention that. Thank you, Subway. And Captain Morgan. What academics regard as humor in music is usually stuff along the lines of Till Eulenspiel's merry pranks. Remember in music appreciation class when they told you that the E-flat clarinet is going, ha ha ha. Take my word for it, folks. You can do way better than that. I've stated elsewhere that Timbre Rules. Rules what? For one thing, it rules the humor domain. The minute you hear a trumpet with a harmon mute going, you register something as a humor something. There aren't any technical names for these things because they just don't give foundation grants to study this kind of stuff. Likewise, a bass saxophone playing at his lowest register conveys another sort of HS, humor something. And how about your old buddy the slide trombone? Surely this graceful, expressive piece of machinery has its little HS radiator built into it. Humor something. I've developed a formula for what these timbres mean, to me at least. I forget how to pronounce that. So when I create an arrangement, if I have access to the right instrumental resources, I can put sounds together that tell more than the story in the lyrics, especially to American listeners raised on subliminal cliches shaping their audio reality from the cradle to the elevator. We crack up during rehearsal because some of the stuff is so stupid. When building an arrangement, every time I have the opportunity to insert one of those melodies, I cram it in, and since rehearsal is a daily 2-hour occurrence while we're on the road, the arrangements often change overnight based on the daily news of some morsel of tour bus folklore. 172. During the pre-tour rehearsals, the band members pencil those, quote, extras, end quotes, into the, quote, the real notes, end quote, so when they finally have the no-show learned, they know not only the song is originally written, but also superimposed it on a flexible grid which will support a continually mutating collage of low-rent Americana. I owe this part of my musical existence to Spike Jones, La Machine. Most of my compositions today are written and performed by a machine, a computer musical instrument called the synclavier. It allows me to create and record a type of music that is impossible or too boring for human beings to play. When I say too boring, I mean that in most compositions, someone has to play this stuff in the background. If you're ever in a band and know anything about musicians, you know that no musician ever liked to play a background part. His mind wanders. Much of today's music involves an ostinato bass line or some other type of repeated figure. If the figure isn't played accurately with conviction, whether it's laid on top or it doesn't work. To save the sanity of musicians who can't keep their minds focused when assigned to accompaniment duties, this machine will play ostinatos cheerfully until it's blue in the face, except it never gets blue in the face. Anything you can dream up can be typed in or played in the synclavier. One of the things I use it for is writing blocks of complicated rhythms, having them executed accurately by groups of instruments. With the synclavier, any group of imaginary instruments can be invited to play the most difficult passages, and the little guys inside of the machine play them with 1 millisecond accuracy every time. The synclavier allows the composer not only to have his piece performed with precision, but to style the performance as well. He can be his own conductor, controlling the dynamics or any other performance parameters. He can bring his idea to the audience in a pure form, allowing them to hear the music rather than the ego problems of the group of players who don't give a shit about the composition. Obviously, there are things you can do with live musicians that you can't do with a synclavier, and vice versa. I view them as separate mediums. Some of the things live musicians do that machines don't do are good, and some are bad. One of the good things is that live musicians just improvise. They respond to the moment and can play expressively can more expressively than the machine. The machine is not devoid of expression, but I really have to type a lot of numbers in to approximate the type of expression that I can get instantaneously from a well-rehearsed live ensemble. But musicians tend to be lazy, and they get sick and skip rehearsals. In fact, they do the kinds of things that other people do in normal jobs. If they were working in a shoestring factory, it might not make much of a difference. At a live concert, everything is pressurized because all you have to work with is that single living 2-hour hunk of time. Machines don't get loaded, drunk, or evicted, and don't need assistance moving their families around in, quote, emergency, end quote, situations. On the other hand, machines don't decide to say things like, "We're Beatrice," in precisely the wrong place in the middle of a song and make people laugh. One of Ike Willis's specialities in a wonderful 80s memory. Subtracting the bullshit of the mistakes. If I had to choose between live musicians or La Machine, I must admit it, from time to time I almost tempted to opt for the human element. Page 174. My job! My precious job! Every so often you hear somebody from the musicians union complaining about the possibility of devices like Synclavier putting musicians out of work. I don't think that will ever happen. There are still plenty of people who believe that the only real music is played by human beings wearing leather and large hair. Other union people seem to be under the impression that if you sample a musician into a Synclavier, you magically, don't laugh, suck the music out of the musician, depraving him of some intangible dignity and / or potential income. Music comes from composers, not musicians. Composers think it up. Musicians perform it. If a musician improvises while he's performing, he becomes, during those moments, a composer. The rest of the time, he is the interpreter of a musical design originated by a composer. Composers don't have a union. And the musicians' union actually makes life difficult for them with certain rulebook technicalities. The musicians' union helped to create the market for sampling machines, but refuses to admit it. Listen to the radio. A lot of what you think is being played by beautiful rock stars is actually being played like machines, like a Synclavier. I know of one group whose producer bought them in for one day and sampled all their instruments. Then he put the song together using the sounds of their instruments. The guys never played on the song. The machine played their instruments for them. All they had to do was come back and sing on top and make the video. While you were art, A-R-T, while you were art. Art Gervinium is a percussionist and a former instructor at Cal Arts. He put together a chamber ensemble called EAR Unit, 2 percussion, 2 keyboards, clarinet, and cello. He asked me to write an arrangement of While You Were Out, a solo from the Shut Up and Play Your Guitar album, for his ensemble to play one of the Monday evening concerts. Remember the postcard with, "You'll be unable to play your piece because it requires left-handed piano." Those guys, they're still in business. I created the arrangement on the Synclavier and, using another one of the machine's favorites, printed out the parts. Then he saw them and realized that it was a difficult piece and worried that his ensemble wouldn't have enough time to rehearse it as the concert was imminent. You're in luck, I told them, because you won't even have to play it. All you have to do is learn to pretend to play it, and I'll have the Singlavir take care of the rest. Just go out there and do what the big rock groups have done for years. Lip sync and make sure you look good on stage. I made them a tape copy of the Singlavir performance and told them the way to pull this off is to have the wires hanging out of your instrument, leading into amplifiers and the effect boxes on the floor. Any sound the audience hears might be deemed as synthesized will be overlooked because there's a wire coming out of your instrument. Final result? The man who ran the concert series didn't know the difference. The two classical reviewers from the major Los Angeles newspapers didn't notice anything either. Nobody in the audience knew it except for David Ocker, my computer assistant, who had helped me prepare the materials. Nobody knew that the musicians never played a note. It produced quite a scandal in the modern music circles. Several members of the ensemble, mortified by all the hoo-ha, swore that they would never, quote, do it again, end quote. Do what again? Prove to the world that nobody knows what the fuck is going on at a contemporary music concert? Conducting an orchestra. One thing the Singlavir can't replace is the experience of conducting an orchestra. The orchestra is the ultimate instrument, and conducting one is an unbelievable sensation. Nothing else is like it, except maybe singing doo-wop in harmony and hearing the chords come out right. From the podium, if the orchestra is playing well, the music sounds good that if you listen to it, you'll fuck up. When I'm conducting, I have to force myself not to listen and to think that what I'm doing with my hand and where the cues go. My conducting style, as such, lurks somewhere between non-existent and massively boring. I try to keep cues to a bare minimum for the players to do their job by simply indicating where the beat is. I don't think of myself often as a, quote, conductor, end quote. Conducting is when you have to draw designs in the nowhere with a stick or with your hands, which are interpreted as institutional messages by guys wearing bow ties who wish they were fishing. Life on stage. At home, a normal day for me is spent working by myself and not talking to anybody, so I really have to change my life around to go on stage. As much as I would like to walk out there and be myself, the fact is that myself, when I am just being myself, would be utterly boring and unwatchable on stage. I don't have the skill or the inclination to do the usual rock and roll gymnastics. So I try to strike a balance between being a sedentary as I actually am doing whatever has to be done in order to add modicum of physical movement to the show. I also have to take care of the daily business of running the equivalent of a little circus on the road. Part of this job is to make sure that the band delivers what is supposed to be delivered for the people who bought the tickets. No matter how much we've rehearsed, I still have to steer the show in progress. Is the sequence working? Is the keyboard solo taking too long to develop? Is everybody watching so that when I give the cue to come in after the alto solo and Inca Roads, there won't be a train wreck? The only time I can lose consciousness is when I'm playing a guitar solo, and then I have to concentrate 100% on that, or at least 90%, to do it right. If I'm in a bad mood, I try not to share that with the audience at the same time. I'm not the kind of guy who can put on the Mr. Happy face and pretend that all is right with the world. Acting out a lie is even worse than telling it. Amen. In a situation where the intention is to create some sort of structured, spontaneous entertainment involving audience participation, the audience attending that concert is the only audience that is going to experience it. The piece exists only for them, unless it's recorded and goes out to a live album. But on the moment, it's just for them. If they want to be part of it, great. If not, next case. We once played a horrible venue, some kind of sports hall in southern Illinois. The band was set up on the floor, and our amplifiers were playing straight into a concrete wall about 2 stories high, with the audience on top of it, looking down. Can you visualize that? It was worst setup imaginable. So naturally, I decided to try some audience participation. Like, we can barely see them. I want them to participate. Sure you do. I divided them into 5 sections according to the way the seats fanned out. Each section was going to have a different part of a mass chorus, maybe 5,000 people. I said, now, you guys over there, you're going to sing Harbor Lights. They had never heard of Harbor Lights, but we showed them how it goes. Then I said to the other sections, you're going to sing In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. You're going to sing the opening bassoon from The Rite of Spring. You're going to sing the prelude to Act 3 of Lohengrin, and you lucky folks over there get Ave Maria. I'll show you when to come in. What a noise that was. I try to have a good time on stage. It helps to compensate for the unpleasant physical sensation of being forced to perform in halls with shitty acoustics after waiting for a couple of hours in a dressing room that smells like sports vomit. But that's what I get for choosing rock and roll instead of the bassoon. Maybe I'd better talk about the guitar for a minute here. Stuff about playing the guitar. My father kept his college guitar in the closet. I plunked around on it every once in a while, but couldn't figure out how to make it work. It didn't make any sense to me. It didn't feel good when I touched it. Then my younger brother Bobby picked up a cowboy-style archtop F-hole guitar at an auction for $1.50 and started playing it. At the time, I was interested in R&B. I liked the sound of blues guitar solos, but guitar wasn't featured an instrument in most of the records. The saxophone was. I waited for records that had guitar solos on them, but they were always too short. I wanted to be able to play my own solos, long ones, so I taught myself how to play the guitar. I didn't bother to learn any chords, just blues licks. Stylistically, my approach is closest to Guitar Slim, a mid-50s blues player who recorded for the Specialty label. Check out the story on... check out the solo on Story My Life. Until somebody stabbed him to death with an ice pick. when I first heard it, I thought, what the fuck is he doing? He really gets pissed off at it. His style of playing seemed to be beyond the notes. It had to do more with the attitude with which he was mangling his instrument. What came out was just the sum total of certain pitches versus certain chords versus certain rhythms. To my ear, it was something else. Besides the attitude, he also provided the first instance I can recall of distorted electric guitar in a record. Although I wouldn't say I could play a guitar slim lick sitting here today, his mangle it, strangle it attitude provided an important aesthetic guidepost for the style I eventually developed. My two other influences were Johnny Guitar Watson and Clarence Gatemouth Brown. I'm not a virtuoso guitar player. A virtuoso can play anything, and I can't. I can play only what I know to the extent that I've developed enough manual dexterity to get the point across, but that has deteriorated over time. With the 1988 band, I didn't have to play very much on the show because the focus was on my horn arrangements and the vocals. I didn't have to play 15-minute guitar solos. Really, that's not much. The audience has shriveled to about 8 bars, and in those 8 bars, you're expected to play every note that you know. The concept of the rock guitar solo in the 80s has pretty much been reduced to wheelie wee, wheelie 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 wee, to make a face and hold your guitar like it's your weenie, point it heavenward, and look like you're really doing something. Then you get a big ovation while the smoke bombs go off and the motorized lights in your truss swirl around. I can't do that stuff. I still have to look down at the neck to see where my hand is where I'm playing. One of the reasons why people don't want to become guitar players is that they think there's more to it than there actually is. When I first started, I was very enthusiastic about the improvisational possibilities offered by the instrument. But this has been dampened by somewhat of the fact that in order to engage the type of improvisational escapades that seem natural to me, I must be accompanied by a specialized rhythm section. A soloist choosing to work in this odd style ultimately wins up a hostage. He can go only as far as the experimental zones as his rhythm section will allow him to go. The problem lies in the polyrhythms. The chances of finding a drummer, a bass player, and a keyboard player who can conceive of those polyrhythms, let alone identify them fast enough to play a complementary figure on the moment, are not good. The grand prize goes to Vinny Colaiuta, the drummer for the band in 1978 and 79. It's hard to explain to a rhythm section during a rehearsal what to do if I'm playing 17 in the space of 14, or Monday and Tuesday in the space of Wednesday. I can't specify it in advance. Everything that ought to happen in the accompaniment when the shit hits the fan in the middle of a solo. Either a drummer will play steady time, in which case my line will wander over his time, or he will hear the polyrhythms and play inside them, implying that the basic pulse for most rock drummers, accustomed as they are to life in the petrified forest of boom, boom, bap. Jazz drummers can't do it either because they tend to play flexible time. Polyrhythms are interesting only in reference to a steady metronomic beat, implied or actual. Otherwise, you're wallowing in rubato. Just as in diatonic harmony, when the upper partials are added to a chord, it becomes tenser. And the more demanding of a resolution, the more the rhythm of the line rubs against the implied basic time, the more statistical tension is generated. The creation and destruction of harmonic and statistical tensions is essential to the maintenance of compositional drama. Any composition or improvisation which remains consistent and regular throughout is, for me, equivalent to watching a movie with only good guys in it or eating cottage cheese. I want to know 3 things when I go on stage. 1, that my equipment is working. 2, that the band members absolutely know the material, so I don't have to worry about them. And 3, that the rhythm section can hear what I'm playing and that it has some concept of it and it can help build the improvisation. If those conditions are met, the acoustics are reasonable, and if I'm satisfied with my amp sound, I could probably write another small book on that topic. Well, there is. Then, all I want to do is go on autopilot, wiggle my fingers, and listen to what comes out. During the 1984 tour, I will usually play 8 solos per night, 5 nights a week, times 6 months. And out of that, there might be 20 solos that were musically worthwhile to put on a record. The rest of it was garbage. It's not what I was. It's not that I wasn't trying to play something. Most of it just didn't come off. If you're working this way, the chances of doing it right every time are not good. But I'll take the chance. I don't feel I have anything to apologize for or any exalted reputation to uphold. 182. My splendid voice. It has been my experience that writing for singers precludes certain options provided by instruments, and the options get even more limited if the voice being written for it is mine, since I don't have much of a range. I can easily talk a song or do meltdown, but I can sing only about an octave with 75 to 80% pitch accuracy. Let's be honest about it. Friends and neighbors, with specs like that, I couldn't even pass an audition to get my own band. Or to get in my own band. I can't play guitar and sing at the same time. My brain can't handle it. I can't even play rhythm guitar and sing. It's hard enough for me to stay in tune just singing. For a while there, I couldn't find anybody to fill the position of lead singer, so I had to do it myself. This led to a desperate search for professional-sounding singers. Voila! Ike Willis and Ray White, and look at the other vocalists who auditioned. When confronted with lyrics like Andy Devine had a thong rind, decided to think twice about their careers. They didn't want anything like that to crawl out of their mouths. My lyrics are dumb, so what? Some of the stuff I write is musically uncompromising. Boy, is this ever hard to play category. Then there's this other category, songs which the intrigue resides in the lyrics rather than the music. If a piece intends to actually tell a story, I don't build an elaborate accompaniment because it gets in the way of the words. Take Dynamo Hum, for example. The artificial cowboy setting was chosen because it seemed right for the story, but the song The Dangerous Kitchen is another deal altogether. The Dangerous Kitchen. If it ain't one thing, it's another. In the middle of the night, when you go home, the bread things are dry and scratchy, the meat things or the cats are ate through the paper, the canned things with the sharp little edges that can cut your fingers when you're not looking, the soft little things on the floor that you step on, they all can be dangerous. Sometimes the milk can hurt you if you put it on your cereal before you smell the plastic container. And the stuff in the strainer has a mind of its own, so be careful. In The Dangerous Kitchen, where the nightmares have fallen and the roaches are crawling in the kitchen of danger, you can feel like a stranger. The bananas are black and the flies are in the back, and also the chicken and the dish with the foil where the cream is all clabbered and where the salad is frightful, and your return in the evening can be less than delightful. You must walk very careful. You must not lean against it. It can get on your clothing. It can follow you in. And as you walk in the bedroom and take your clothes off while you were sleeping, it crawls off and gets in your bed. It can get in your face then. It could eat your complexion. You could die from the danger of the dangerous kitchen. Who the fuck wants to clean it? It's disgusting and dirty. The sponge and the drainer, it's stinky and squirty. If you squeeze it when you wipe it, and then it gets on your hands, you can unbalance your glands, make you blind or whatever in the dangerous kitchen at my house tonight. From the album Man from Utopia, 1982. The words were completely written out, but the melody and the accompaniment were improvised nightly in a style we call meltdown. The accompaniment was designed to provide rhythm, texture, and sound effects, not necessarily chords, melody, and a good beat. A sort of rock speechemizing setting, combining a parody of the poetry and jazz aroma of the beatnikism with an abstraction of the type of onomatopoeia found in these Beethoven Meadowland movements with the cuckoos and the wind, etc. Except in this case, there was no cuckoo, just the stuff in the strainer. I don't have any pretensions about being a poet. My lyrics are there for entertainment purposes only, not to be taken internally. Some of them are truly stupid, and some are slightly less stupid, and a few of them are sort of funny. Apart from the snide political stuff, which I enjoy writing, the rest of the lyrics wouldn't exist at all if it weren't for the fact that we live in a society where instrumental music is irrelevant. So if a guy expects to learn a living by providing musical entertainment for folks in the USA, he'd better figure out how to do something with a human voice plopped on it. Deviation from the norm. One of the things I've said before in interviews, without deviation from the norm, progress is not possible. In order to deviate successfully, one has to have at least a passing acquaintance with whatever norm one expects to deviate from. When a musician comes into my band, he already knows sets of musical norms. The drummers know all the drum beat norms, how to play disco, how to play a shuffle, how to play a fatback, etc., etc. Bass players know how to do the bass player norms, thumb pops, walking lines, traditional ostinatos, etc., etc., etc. Those are today's radio music norms. Part of the fun in preparing touring arrangements is nuking those norms. The place where one finds the least enthusiasm for norm nuking is in the world of the symphony orchestra. If you hand an orchestral musician a piece of new music, his instant response is likely to be, "Feh, this was written by some guy who was still alive." Players who come to the orchestra already knowing what's good because they played it a million times in the conservatory. So when a composer approaches an orchestra with a piece of music embodying techniques or ideas that weren't certified during the musician's conservatory days, he is likely to, page 186, experience rejection at the molecular level as a defense mechanism of the entire orchestra. As soon as an orchestra attempts to play something they don't know, they run the risk of fucking up. There are only two ways for them to avoid this potential embarrassment. One is to rehearse, but who will pay for this precious rehearsal time? The other is to avoid playing any new music. When a guest conductor comes to town, he is not usually giving a performance of something by a living composer. He's doing Brahms, he's doing Beethoven, he's doing Mozart, because he can warm up to it in one afternoon and make it sound okay. This makes the accountants happy and allows the audience to contribute to his choreography, which is really what they bought their tickets for in the first place. Why is that any better than a bunch of guys in a bar band jamming on Louie Louie or Midnight Hour? Hateful practices. I found music of the classical period boring because it reminds me of painting by numbers. There are certain things composers of that period were not allowed to do because they were considered to be outside of the boundaries of the industrial regulations, which determined whether the piece was a symphony, a sonata, or whatever. All the norms as practiced during the olden days came into being as the guys who paid the bills wanted the tunes that they were buying to sound a certain way. The king said, "I'll chop off your head unless it sounds like this." The pope said, "I'll rip off your fingernails unless it sounded like this." The duke of somebody else might have said it another way. And it's the same today. If your song won't get played on the radio unless it sounds like this, people who think that classical music is somehow more elevated than radio music should take a look at the forms involved and who's paying the bills. Once upon a time, there was a king or pope, so-and-so. Today we just have broadcast license holders, radio programmers, disc jockeys, and record company executives, banal reincarnations of the assholes who shaped the music of the past. The contemporary harmony textbook is the embodiment of those evils in catalog form. When I was handed my first book and told to do the exercises, I hated the sound of the sample passages. I study them anyways. If something is hateful, you should at least know what it is that you're hating so you can avoid it in the future. Many compositions that have been accepted as great art through the years reek of these hateful practices. For example, the rule of harmony says the second degree of the scale should go to the fifth degree of the scale, which would go to the okay, that's it. Get out my guitar. Ugh. I'm angry. I gotta take it out on this thing, and I lost my damn glasses too. So, the first degree of the scale, the root or the tonic, it's C in the key of C. That's, you don't call it one, it's just that. But 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, back to the root. So, here it is. In case you read this book and you're wondering what it might sound like, the second degree of the scale should do the fifth degree of the scale, which is sound like this. Tin Pan Alley songs and jazz standards thrive on the 2-5-1. To me, this is a hateful progression. In jazz, they beef it up a little by adding extra partials onto the chords to make them luxurious. Okay, here it is. I can't even see this thing. There it is. Okay. And then they make them, okay. But it's still a 2-5-1. To me, a 2-5-1 is the essence of white person music. One of the most exciting things that ever happened to me in the world of white person music is when the Beach Boys used the 5-2 on Little Deuce Coupe, whatever. An important step forward by going backward. Or fucking Justin Hayward, too, I guess. The instructor's job is to make you learn how to do all the stuff in those books. To get a grade, you must write exercises proving that you're capable of accommodating the entertainment needs of the deceased kings and popes. And after you've proved it, you get a piece of paper that says you're a composer. Is that nauseating or what? It's worse in the graduate courses that tech students how to do, quote, modern, end quote, music. Even modern music has hateful practices, like 12-tone business that says you can't play one note until you've cycled through all the other 11. Theoretically, thwarting tonality by giving each pitch equal importance. The ultimate rule ought to be, if it sounds good to you, it's bitchin'. If it sounds bad to you, it's shitty. The more you've varied your musical experience, the easier it is for you to define it for yourself, what you like and what you don't like. American radio listeners, raised on a diet of fill in the blank, have experienced a musical universe so small they cannot begin to know what it's like. In radio music, timbre rules. The texture of the tune, i.e. Purple Haze, played on the accordion, is very different than Hendrix playing it on a squealing feedback guitar. On a record, the overall timbre of the piece, determined by equalization of the individual parts and what proportions of the mix, tells you in a subtle way what the song is about. The orchestration provides important information about what the composition is, and in some instances assumes a greater importance than the composition itself. American listeners know very little about the ethnic music of other cultures. The closest they can get to contemporary orchestral is part of the latest film, TV, background music. It's amazing that schools still offer courses in music composition. What a useless thing to spend money on, or to take a college course on how to learn to be a modern composer. No matter how good the course is, when you get out, what the fuck will you do for a living? The easiest thing to do is to become a composition teacher yourself, spreading the disease to the next generation. One of the things that determines the curriculum in music schools is which of the current fashions in modern music gets to the most grant money from the mysterious benefactors in Foundation Land. For a while there, unless you were doing a serial music in which the pitches have numbers, the dynamics have numbers, the vertical densities have numbers, etc. If it didn't have a pedigree like that, it wasn't a good piece of music. Critics and academians stood by waiting to tell you what a piece of shit your opus was if your numbers didn't add up. Forget what it sounded like, or whether it moved anybody, or what it was about. The most important thing was the numbers. The foundation that provide grant money for people engaged in these pursuits occasionally decide to stop funding one style of music after becoming entranced with another. For instance, it used to be that they would fund only bop beep stuff, serial and or electronic composition. Now they're funding only minimalism, simplistic, repetitive composition, easy to rehearse, and therefore cost effective. So, what gets taught in school? Minimalism. Why? Because it can be funded. Net critical result. Monochromatic monotony. Monochromatic monotony. In order to gain the status at a university, a professor or composer in residence has to be plunged into something that's really hot, something fundable. And as this writing, and the secret word is minimalism. So, after a busy semester grading papers of their minimalist trainees, they adjust their berets and fill out the request forms for foundation assistants. Students and instructors alike compete annually for pieces of this pie. One day, these cultural institutions are going to stop funding minimalist music and fund something else. And the serious music landscape will be littered and with the shriveled remains of an excerpt graduate minimalists. Page 189. Bingo! There goes your tenure! The following section is excerpted from the keynote address I delivered at the 1984 convention at the American Society of University Composers, also known as ASUC. ASUC! I do not belong to your organization. I know nothing about it. I'm not even interested in it. And yet, a request has been made for me to give what purports to be a keynote speech. Before I go on, let me warn you that I talk dirty. And that I will say things that you will neither enjoy nor agree with. You shouldn't feel threatened, though, because I am a mere buffoon, and you are all serious American composers. For those who you don't know, I am also a composer. I taught myself how to do it by going to the library and listening to records. I started when I was 14, and I've been doing it for 30 years. I don't like schools. I don't like teachers. I don't like most of the things that you believe in. And if that weren't bad enough, I earn a living by playing the electric guitar. For convenience, without wishing to offend the membership, I will use the word we when discussing matters pertaining to composers. Some of the we references will apply generally, some will not. And now, the speech. Okay, here's the picture here. The new perfect living composers need not apply. Employment office inversions or so. Let's see here. Future site of the new mini condo complex. Okay. Is, quote, new music, end quote, relevant in an industrial society. The most baffling aspect of the instructional American relevance question is, why do people continue to compose music and even pretend to teach others how to do it when they already know the answer? Nobody gives a fuck. It is really worth the trouble to write. Is it really worth the trouble to write a new piece of music for an audience that doesn't care? The general consensus seems to be that music by living composers is not only irrelevant, but it was generally obnoxious to a society which concerns itself primarily with the consumption of disposable merchandise. Surely we must be punished for wasting everyone's precious time with an art form so unrequited and trivial in the general scheme of things. Ask your banker. Ask your loan officer at the bank. He'll tell you, we are scum. We are the scum of the earth. We are bad people. We are useless bums. No matter how much tenure we manage to weasel out of the universities where we manufacture our baffling and insipid packages of inconsequential poot, we know deep down that we are worthless. Some of us smoke a pipe. Others have tweed sports coats with leather patches on the elbows. Some of us have mad scientist eyebrows. Yeah, Philip Glass. Some of us engage in the shameless display of incredibly dramatic mufflers dangling in the vicinity of our turtleneck sweater. These are only a few reasons why we must be punished. Today, just as in the glorious past, the composer has to accommodate the specific taste, no matter how bad, of the king, reincarnated as a movie or TV producer or the head of an opera company, the lady with the frightening hair on the special committee, on her niece Debbie. Some of you don't know about Debbie, since you don't have to deal with radio sessions and record companies and the way that people in the real world do, but you want to find out about her just in case you decide to visit later. Debbie is 13 years old. Her parents like to think of themselves as the average, God-fearing American white folk. Her dad belongs to a corrupt union of some sort and is, as we might expect, a lazy, incompetent, overpaid, ignorant son of a bitch. And there's mother. Her mother is a sexually maladjusted mercenary shrew who lives to spend her husband's paycheck on ridiculous clothes, making her look younger. Debbie is incredibly stupid. She has been raised to respect the values and traditions which her parents hold sacred. Sometimes she dreams about being kissed by a lifeguard. When the people in the secret office where they run everything from found out about Debbie, they were thrilled. She was perfect. She was hopeless. She was their kind of girl. She was immediately chosen to become the archetypal imaginary pop music consumer and ultimate attribute of musical taste for the entire nation. From the moment on, everything musical in this country would have to be modified to conform to what they computed to be her needs and desires. Debbie's taste determined the size, shape, and color of all music broadcasts sold in the United States during the latter part of the 20th century. Eventually, she grew up to be just like her mother and married a guy just like her dad. She has somehow managed to reproduce herself. The people in the secret office have their eye on her daughter at this very moment. Now, as a serious American composer, should Debbie really concern you? I think so. Since Debbie prefers only short songs with lyrics about boy-girl relationships sung by persons of indeterminate sex wearing S&M clothing, and because there is large money involved, the major record companies, which a few years ago occasionally risk investment in recordings of new works, have all but shut down their classical divisions, seldom recording new music. The small labels do have wretched distribution. Some have wretched accounting procedures. They might release your recording, but you won't get paid. This underscores a major problem with living composers. They like to eat. Mostly what they eat is brown and lumpy, and there's no question to this diet that has an effect on their collective output. A composer's job involves the decoration of fragments of time. Without music to decorate, time is just a bunch of boring production deadlines and dates by which bills must be paid. Living composers are entitled to proper compensation for the use of their works. Dead guys don't collect. One reason their music is chosen for the performance. There is another reason for the popularity of dead person music. Conductors prefer it because they need more than anything else to look good. By performing pieces that the orchestra members have hacked out their way through the conservatory days, the rehearsal costs are minimized. Players go to jukebox mode and spew off the classics with ease, and expensive guest conductor, unencumbered by score with problems in it, gets to thrash around and mock ecstasy for the benefit of the committee ladies who wish they didn't have any pants on. Hey buddy, when was the last time you thwarted a norm? Can't risk it, eh? Too much at stake over the old alma mater, nowhere else to go, unqualified for janitorial deployment. Look out! Hey, they come again. That's a bunch of guys who live the old joke. It's you and 2 billion of your closest friends standing in the shit to your chins chanting, "Don't make a wave." It's the terror of a bad review from one of those tone-deaf elitists who use the premiere performance of every new work as an excuse to sharpen their word skills. It's setting for rotten performances by musicians and conductors who prefer the sound of death warmed over to anything scribbled in recent memory, making them assistant music critics, but somehow more glamorous. It's clutching the old serial pedigree, secure in the knowledge that no one checks anymore. Page 194. Beat them to the punch, ladies and gentlemen. Punish yourselves before they do it to you. And if you do it as a group, the TV rights must be worth something. Start planning now so that everything will be ready in time for the next convention. Change the name of your organization to ASUC to We Suck. Get some cyanide and swizzle it into a punch bowl with that old white wine artistic people really go for, and bite the big one. If the current level of ignorance and illiteracy persists in about 200 or 300 years of merchandising nostalgia for this era will occur, and guess what music they'll play? They'll still play it if wrong, of course, and you won't get any money for having written it. But what the hey? At least you didn't die of syphilis in a whorehouse, an opium stupor with a white curly wig on. It's all over, folks. Get smart. Take a real estate license. The least you can do is tell your students, don't do it. Stop this madness. Don't write any more modern music. If you don't, the little stinker might grow up to kiss more ass than you, have a longer, more dramatic neck scarf, write more music, more baffling and insipid than your own, and bingo! There goes your tenure! Pierre Boulez. I met Boulez after seeing him some orchestrals, after sending him some orchestral scores, hoping that he would be interested in conducting them. He wrote back saying that it couldn't be done, although he did have a chamber orchestra of 28 pieces. He did have a full-size symphony orchestra at his disposal in France, and even if he did, he probably wouldn't have used it, as he later stated that he didn't care for the French orchestral tone, preferring the BBC symphony. I bought my first Boulez album when I was in the 12th grade, a Columbia recording of Les Métiers sans Limite, The Hammer Without a Master, conducted by Robert Kraft, with Zenemes, or Time Mass, by Stockhausen on the other side. Within a year of that, I managed to get a hold of a score. I listened to the record while following the score, and I noticed that the performance was not very accurate. I later acquired a recording of Les Martyrs, and on the Turnabout label with Boulez conducting, and I was surprised to find that he took the first movement much more slowly than the tempo marked in the score. I razzed him about it when we met. Boulez is, to me, one of the Thomas Nordeg's favorite phrases, serious as cancer, but he can be funny too. He reminds me a little of the character Herbert Lom plays in the Pink Panther movies. He doesn't have a psychotic wink, but he has some of that nervous quality about him, as he might, given the proper excuse, start laughing uncontrollably. I went to lunch with him in Paris prior to the Perfect Stranger recording. He ordered something called Timbre du fill in the blank. I don't know what it was. It looked like some meat-like material on weird lettuce with translucent dressing. He looked like he was really enjoying it. He offered some to me. I asked him what it was. He said, "The sliced nose of a cow." I thanked him and went back to my pepper steak. I saw him conduct the New York Philharmonic with Phyllis Brew Jolson as a soloist at Lincoln Center in 86 or 87. The audience was extremely rude. The first half of the program had pieces by Stravinsky and Debussy. The second half was a piece by Boulez. After the intermission, the audience came back and waited for him to begin his piece, which was very quiet compared to the first two. And then about half the audience got up noisily and walked out. He kept on conducting. I would have enjoyed the opportunity to grab the microphone and scream, "Sit down, assholes! This is one of the real guys!" Page 196. The Perfect Stranger. Since releasing the London Symphony Orchestra album, I have turned down at least 15 commissions from chamber music groups of varying sizes from all over the world who have offered me cash to write a piece of music for them. If I were a composer just starting out, I would think that was the greatest thing in the world, but I don't have the time anymore. And I shudder to think of what would happen to the music if they played it without my being there during rehearsals. Complicating matters, these commissions are offered in a way that requires my presence at the premiere performance, during which I would be expected to sit there and pretend it was terrific. That's what happened to me when Boulez conducted the live premiere of Dupree's Paradise, The Perfect Stranger, and Naval Aviation and Art. It was under-rehearsed. I hated that premiere. Boulez virtually had to drag me onto the stage to take a bow. I was sitting on the chair off to the side of the stage during the concert, and I could see the sweat squirting out of the musicians' foreheads. Then they had to go into the IRCAM studio for the next day and record it. In the game of new music, everybody has to take a chance. A conductor takes a chance, a performance takes a chance, and the audience takes a chance. But the guy who takes the biggest chance is the composer. The performers will probably not play his piece correctly. Bad attitude, not enough rehearsal time. And the audience won't like it because it doesn't sound good. Bad acoustics, weak performance. There's no such thing as a second chance in this situation. The audience gets only one chance to hear it because though the program says world premiere, that actually means last performance. Before an audience can tell whether they like whether it likes a piece, it needs to listen to it. Before it can listen to it, it has to know that it exists. In order for it to exist in the form which it can be heard, not just on paper, it has to be performed. In order for a large audience to experience it, the performance must be recorded, released, distributed, and given a full retail shelf space. Interesting new music does exist. In spite of my rude comments earlier in this chapter, I know that sincere, optimistic people continue to compose it. Well, where the fuck is it then? Glad you asked. On rare occasions, when it does get recorded, it doesn't get the big push or even weazened little shove. So any audience might enjoy listening to it has difficulty finding it. Mr. Retailer doesn't give a shit. He needs to move as many Michael Jackson records out the door as he can. He has a mortgage to pay. Joe Blow's Super Bitchin' Concerto that used to wind up in bin 29 is in a way back, not even there anymore. If we were to expect to develop any kind of music culture worth preserving for future generations in the U.S., we need to take a good look at the system which determines how things get done, why they get done, how often they get done, and who gets to do them. And now a premiere performance, in fact, fake Zappa himself has not even heard this. I will perform the fake Zappa premiere of my personal rendition of Joe Blow's Super Bitchin' Concerto right now on my channel. You're right, nobody gives a shit about that.